Amina stood still. She heard every single word. For a brief moment, the soft music in the background felt distant, as if the world had slowed down just for her. She had heard comments like this before. Whispers, jokes, looks that assumed she was less simply because of her skin color and her uniform. But this time was different. Not because the words hurt more, but because they were spoken with such confidence. Confidence that came from money. Confidence that came from believing power meant superiority. Amina gently placed the tray down on the edge of the table. Her hands did not shake. Her face did not change. Years of discipline had taught her how to remain calm when others tried to make her feel small. Kareem continued speaking in Arabic, leaning back in his chair. People like her should be grateful just to serve people like us, he said, swirling his drink. This place is lowering its standards. His friends nodded, amused, unaware that every word landed clearly in Amina's mind. Amina took a slow breath. Her thoughts traveled far from that restaurant, to a small apartment in Dubai, where her father used to sit by the window, reading Arabic poetry aloud. He had been a language teacher, a man who believed words carried responsibility. He once told her, "Knowledge is power, but humility is strength." That lesson echoed now. She could have walked away. She could have stayed silent. But silence, she realized, would only protect his arrogance. So she spoke, softly at first, calmly, clearly. In flawless Arabic, she said, "Sir, may I suggest that respect is not measured by where someone sits, but by how they speak when they think no one understands them." The table froze. Kareem's smile vanished instantly. His friends looked at him, then at Amina, unsure of what they had just heard. The billionaire slowly turned his head toward her, his eyes widening slightly. Amina continued, her voice steady. "You question whether someone like me belongs here," she said. "I work honestly. I serve with dignity. That alone gives me the right to stand anywhere." Nearby tables had begun to notice the tension. Forks paused midair. Conversations faded. Kareem straightened in his seat. For the first time that evening, he looked uncomfortable. "Do you understand Arabic?" he asked, clearly shaken. Amina nodded politely. Fluently. There was a long pause. Then something unexpected happened. Kareem exhaled slowly and placed his glass down on the table. The confidence that once filled his posture had softened. "I spoke carelessly," he said, now choosing his words. "I assumed knowledge based on appearance. That was my mistake." He stood up, drawing even more attention. "I have built companies, controlled markets, and negotiated with world leaders," he said, his voice quieter now. "Yet today, a waitress reminded me of a lesson I forgot." He looked directly at Amina. "Never underestimate anyone." The restaurant was silent. Kareem reached into his pocket and placed a large tip on the table, but Amina barely glanced at it. What mattered more was the shift, the realization in his eyes. "Thank you for correcting me," he said sincerely. Amina gave a small nod. "Thank you for listening." She picked up her tray and walked away, her steps light, her back straight. Behind her, conversations slowly resumed. The restaurant was silent. Kareem reached into his pocket and placed a large tip on the table, but Amina barely glanced at it. What mattered more was the shift, the realization in his eyes. "Thank you for correcting me," he said sincerely. Amina gave a small nod. "Thank you for listening." She picked up her tray and walked away, her steps light, her back straight. Behind her, conversations slowly resumed. But something had changed. People looked at her differently now. Not as a waitress, but as a woman who stood firm in grace, intelligence, and self-respect. And Kareem Al-Hassan, he finished his meal in silence, humbled not by wealth or status, but by a voice he never expected to hear. Amina lowered her eyes, not in shame, but in control. Inside her chest, emotions rose like a storm, but she didn't react. Not yet. What Kareem didn't know was that Amina wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just a girl working long shifts to survive. She was born in Sudan, raised in Dubai, and educated in London. Her father was a language professor who taught her Arabic before she could even read English. Arabic wasn't foreign to her. It was home. But life had not been kind. After her parents passed away, Financial struggles forced her to take any job she could find. She chose dignity over pride and worked honestly, even when people looked down on her. Amina had learned one powerful lesson from her father. Never rush to answer ignorance. Let wisdom speak at the right time. So she waited. She calmly placed water glasses on the table, her hands steady, her expression neutral. The crystal glass made a soft sound as it touched the marble surface. No anger, no hesitation. Kareem smirked again and added another Arabic comment, louder this time. She probably doesn't even understand what I'm saying. That's when Amina gently inhaled and smiled. The smile wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't angry. It was peaceful, the kind of smile that comes from certainty, from knowing exactly who you are, even when others don't. Slowly, she lifted her gaze and looked directly at Kareem. Her eyes were calm, but they carried weight. The room seemed quieter, as if something important was about to happen. In a soft, clear voice, Amina spoke in perfect Arabic. Sir, respect is not measured by wealth, but by how we treat those we believe are beneath us. The words landed gently, but firmly. Kareem froze. His fingers tightened around his glass. His smile vanished. Around the table, his friends stopped laughing, their faces turning pale with surprise. Amina continued, her tone respectful but confident. You asked whether someone like me belongs here, she said. I work with honesty. I serve with dignity. That alone gives me purpose. A nearby table went silent. A fork slipped from someone's hand and clinked against a plate. People were watching now. Kareem slowly leaned forward. Do you speak Arabic? He asked, stunned. Yes, Amina replied calmly. Fluently. There was a long pause. For the first time in years, Kareem felt exposed, not by accusation but by truth. He had spoken carelessly, assuming power meant invisibility, assuming his words would never return to him. He placed his glass down and cleared his throat. I spoke without respect, he said, his voice quieter. And I was wrong. The billionaire stood up, drawing even more attention. I have money, he continued. Influence. A name people fear. But tonight I forgot something important. He looked directly at Amina. True class is not about where you sit. It's about how you see others. The restaurant was completely silent now. Kareem reached into his pocket and placed a generous tip on the table, but Amina barely looked at it. Thank you for reminding me, he said sincerely. Amina nodded once. Thank you for listening. She picked up her tray and walked away, her steps steady, her back straight. As she disappeared into the kitchen, quiet whispers filled the room. People didn't just see a waitress anymore. They saw intelligence, strength, grace. And Kareem Al-Hassan sat back down, humbled, not by loss, not by failure, but by a woman he had underestimated. That night, Amina finished her shift like any other. But something had changed, not in her, in the world around her. In a clear, fluent, and confident voice, Amina replied in perfect Arabic. Respect doesn't come from money, sir. It comes from character. And character is revealed when you think no one understands you. The words fell like thunder. Kareem froze. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth, the ice inside clinking softly before going still. His confident smile vanished as if it had never existed. Across the table, his friends stared at Amina, their laughter fading into uncomfortable silence. The table felt heavier, the air tighter, as though the room itself had leaned in to listen. Amina continued calmly, still in Arabic. You asked if someone like me belongs here. I do. I work with honesty. I serve with dignity. Can the same be said about how you speak about others? The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Nearby conversations stopped. A couple at the next table slowly turned their heads. Even the soft background music felt distant now. Kareem's face turned pale. For the first time in years, he had been caught, exposed not by power, not by authority, but by humility and intelligence. He searched for words, but none came. The language he once used to feel superior had now become the mirror revealing his arrogance. Amina finished softly, her voice steady and respectful. Would you like to order now, sir? Silence. Then, slowly, Kareem placed his glass down. The sound of it touching the table echoed louder than expected. He took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and finally looked up at her, not as a waitress, but as an equal. "I owe you an apology," he said, speaking in Arabic once more. His tone was different now, calmer, sincere. "I spoke carelessly. I assumed I was unseen. I was wrong." His friend avoided eye contact, suddenly interested in their plates. Kareem stood up, drawing the attention of the entire room. "I have spent my life building wealth," he continued. "I have been respected, feared, and praised. But today I was reminded of something far more valuable." He turned back to Amina. "True worth is not proven by status, but by how we treat those who serve us." A quiet murmur spread through the restaurant. Kareem reached into his pocket and placed a large tip on the table, but Amina gently shook her head. "Your words matter more than your money," she said simply. That sentence struck deeper than anything else that evening. Kareem nodded slowly. "Thank you for reminding me who I should be." Amina offered a small, graceful smile. She took his order, wrote it down calmly, and turned away as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had changed. As she walked back toward the kitchen, heads turned. People watched her with new eyes, with respect, curiosity, and admiration. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a woman who had spoken truth without anger and strength without arrogance. Kareem sat back down, quieter than before. The confidence that once filled his posture had softened into reflection. His food arrived, but he barely touched it. That night, the billionaire left the restaurant without his usual laughter, without his loud conversations. He left carrying a lesson he hadn't paid for, but desperately needed. And Amina? She finished her shift the same way she always did, honestly, gracefully, and with her head held high. Because when wisdom speaks at the right moment, even the most powerful are forced to listen. Kareem cleared his throat. His voice was different now. Lower, slower, stripped of the confidence that once filled it. He spoke in Arabic again, but this time with respect. "I owe you an apology. I spoke with arrogance. You reminded me of something I forgot." People at nearby tables had started watching. Some sensed something important had happened, even if they didn't understand the words. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted, from casual luxury to quiet reflection. Amina nodded politely, her expression calm. Kareem continued, now switching to English so others could hear. "I judged you without knowing you," he said. "That was wrong." Then he did something no one expected. He stood up. The sound of his chair moving echoed across the room. Conversations stopped completely. All eyes were now on the billionaire who had once laughed so confidently. "I've traveled the world," he said, his voice steady but humbled. "I've sat with presidents, kings, and powerful people. And yet, tonight, I forgot the simplest lesson: never underestimate anyone." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Especially those who serve us." Kareem reached into his wallet and placed a generous tip on the table. The amount was more than most people earned in a week. But his gesture didn't end there. He looked at Amina and added, "My company funds education programs and scholarships. If you ever want support, whether for studies or a new path, my door is open." There was a murmur across the room. Some people nodded. Others exchanged glances, surprised not by the money, but by the sincerity in his voice. Amina smiled, but her answer was calm and powerful. "Thank you," she said gently, "but today your respect is enough." That answer hit harder than any insult ever could. Kareem froze for a moment, then slowly nodded. He understood. For the first time in a long while, he truly understood. Respect, when offered freely, was worth more than any check he could write. Amina picked up her tray and prepared to leave the table. Before she turned away, Kareem spoke one last time. "I hope you know," he said quietly, "you taught me something tonight." Amina met his eyes. "We learn when we listen," she replied. She walked away, her steps steady, her head held high. As she moved through the restaurant, people watched her differently now. Some smiled, some whispered, others simply sat in silence, thinking. Not a single person saw her as just a waitress anymore. Kareem sat back down, his posture changed. The loud confidence that once defined him was gone, replaced by thoughtfulness. His friends remained silent, each of them reflecting on what they had witnessed. The food arrived, but Kareem barely touched it. His appetite for arrogance had disappeared. When the night ended, he left a second tip at the table, quietly this time, and walked out without his usual attention-seeking presence. And Amina? She finished her shift like any other night. She cleaned tables. She smiled at guests. She worked with the same honesty she always had. But something had changed, not in her, but in the world around her. Because sometimes the most powerful lesson doesn't come from wealth, status, or authority. It comes from a calm voice, a wise response, and the courage to speak truth when a moment demands it. That night, Amina returned to work like any other shift. She wiped tables, carried trays, and greeted guests with the same quiet professionalism she always had. There was no celebration, no applause, no dramatic ending, just honest work done with dignity. But something had changed, not just in Kareem, but in everyone who had witnessed that moment. The billionaire left quieter than he arrived. His laughter was gone. His voice was softer. As he stepped out into the night, he carried something heavier than wealth, self-reflection. For the first time in a long while, he questioned not the world, but himself. The waitress stood taller than before, not because she had proven something to others, but because she had stayed true to who she was. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted him. She hadn't needed revenge. She had simply spoken the truth, calmly and clearly, and let it do the work. And the lesson spread far beyond that restaurant. At nearby tables, people sat in silence, replaying the scene in their minds. A businessman loosened his tie, suddenly aware of how he spoke to his own employees. A couple exchanged thoughtful looks, remembering moments when it had judged too quickly. Even the staff, servers, cleaners, hosts, felt seen in a way they rarely did. Never assume someone's worth by their job. The world teaches us to measure value by titles, uniforms, and bank balances. But real worth has nothing to do with what someone wears or where they work. It lives in character, integrity, and the way a person treats others when no one is watching. Never assume intelligence by appearance. Knowledge doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it surprises those who mistake silence for ignorance. Never speak in arrogance, thinking you are unseen, because words have a strange way of returning to us, especially the ones spoken carelessly. Respect given freely costs nothing, but arrogance can cost us our dignity, because sometimes the person you look down on understands more than you ever will. And sometimes the strongest response is not anger, but truth spoken calmly, at exactly the right moment. Amina finished her shift and stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she walked toward the subway, blending into the crowd like any other person heading home. No one stopped her. No one applauded. And that was enough. She carried with her the quiet strength her father had taught her, the belief that wisdom doesn't need to shout and self-respect doesn't need validation. Somewhere across the city, Kareem sat alone in his hotel room, staring out at the skyline. The words she had spoken replayed in his mind, not as an attack, but as a mirror. And in that reflection, he saw not his success, but his responsibility. One conversation, one moment, one calm voice. Sometimes, that's all it takes to remind us that greatness is not about power over others, but humility toward them. And maybe that is the lesson the world needs most.